aged care, as with many aspects of society, is inevitably involved in change. It's an ongoing process.
We've spent decades working towards these reforms. We've been listening to consumers for years. It will also force the sector to think about not only doing things better, but doing things more efficiently.
February 2017 could be characterised as the mother of all disruptions to any industry. Consumer-driven care is a completely different environment to what we've been operating in. We're now in an environment which is much more like a market-driven retail environment.
The challenge, I think, at the moment we face, and I suspect all organisations do, is how do you continue with your core business? How do you manage the core while you are radically changing the future business model? How do you actually, you're basically running two business models at once.
Well, as a CEO, what keeps me up at night as we approach February 2017 is the question of whether our organisation is really ready for those changes.
This is an opportunity to break with a scarcity mentality for everybody and to really think about, what more could I achieve within the framework of reasonable and necessary support?
This really is a game changer in that it removes all those constraints and says to the consumer, you've got control of this, you're putting it with a provider, but if you're not happy, you can move it. You can take it somewhere else.
So organisations sort of have, even if they're a little behind the eight ball and they're just focused on the nuts and bolts of how they transition into a new set of arrangements and what the immediate operational impact is, if that's where their head is at, then I think they've probably got, maybe 12 months to really then get their act together to do the more transformational work.
Boards across this industry should be thinking in terms of both the risk and the opportunities. There's obviously enormous risk for organisations as we enter this environment.
We've been on a board-led strategic journey to become a customer-centric organisation. We could see the changes that were happening in the aged care and related industries, consumer-directed care policies, NDIS, and knew that we had to change culturally. We had to embark on deep cultural change. The journey has really been one about reframing the organisation through the eyes of its customers.
There's a gulf between thinking that your customers love you and knowing that your customers love you. And what we're all going to find out in February 2017 is whether our customers really love us or whether we just think they love us. In other industries where people have gone from a position of not having choice to having choice has been that a lot of organisations find out that once a customer has a choice, perhaps they don't love them so much. As we move around the industry, we're seeing a lot of organisations that are massively underprepared. They haven't got the skill sets in place. They're at that first stage of learning where they don't know what they don't know about what that new environment is going to look like. But we've also seen some incredibly sophisticated organisations in terms of the way that they are going to approach the market, their capability of communicating with their customers, how well across this CDC model they actually are, the amount of feedback and the metrics that they're getting in from their customers. They really know what they're doing in this space.
There is no choice but to try and keep the business ticking along within the current business model and the existing arrangements, and creating management capacity to school yourself on the impact of these new reforms. It's
the other key point to make about governance in this space is that it has to be a really positive, engaged relationship with your CEO, your senior executive team, and your staff more generally, and your customers, your consumers and customers, to actually bring this change about.
Evaluating your service at a higher standard as well, not just for satisfaction, but for making a change, a positive change in people's lives.
You cannot take for granted that what made you successful in the past will continue to work into the future. It's just not going to work that way.
Services will have to learn that it's not how slick your marketing is, it's actually your delivery.
In the same way that some providers are still learning how to be customer focused, that's new for some providers because it hasn't really strongly been a requirement of the old world. I mean, some customers are learning how to be customers.
Like many aged care organisations, we had thought more about government programs, government funding programs, rather than thinking about who are our customers, understanding who they are, how they're different. So we've done quite a lot of work on segmentation. We actually set up an innovation hub to do that work, and it was customer-led.
I think that it's the responsibility of great leadership teams to be looking out, to understand what those risks are, and to be building the models within their own organisations in order to be able to respond and to refresh their own business models before somebody else does it for them.
And the sector is not as attuned to the broader commercial elements of billable hours and time is money in terms of an organisation surviving.
February 2017, I think there's going to be some pain across the industry as we move from what I would expect would be a payment in advance model to a payment in arrears model.
I think one of the challenges we have in terms of adjusting to February 2017 is ensuring we understand how our services are better defined as individual service elements. There are elements of those services that are less financially sustainable than others.
Getting a really clear grip about where they cross-subsidise and taking very strategic decisions about whether or not that cross-subsidisation can be sustained in the new world, or whether they need to look at ways of either ceasing that activity, or doing it in a different way that will be more cost effective.
If you haven't started planning for the February 2017 changes by now, you better start catching up very quickly. At a governance level, it should have been something that was on the radar before the announcement in the May 2015 budget, because it was always going to be part of the next step. You've got IT to get ready, you've got workforce planning to do, you've got understanding what your market is going to be like. All of those things people need to be working on already.
There is a need for organisations to review whether or not their industrial arrangements are appropriate for the new reform. And that's a conversation that needs to be had with the workforce as a whole, and indeed with the board. It's a long conversation, not a short one.
Every staff member needs to approach their job quite differently. We're not selling to the government anymore. We can't take for granted that our customers are going to come to us.
But boards now need to create their own key performance indicators related to their clients. Boards need to understand that in terms of other KPIs, in terms of a more balanced scorecard approach, that they should be actively understanding the business from various perspectives.
Whilst at the same time organisations need to be reviewing their own business models, they also need to be aware that it's becoming a much more competitive environment. Also, to not get caught up in the lights of that competition, to actually use it as an opportunity to draw in their existing service users to understand deeply what is working about the current business model, what services or supports are valued, which ones they're perhaps not doing so well, possibly because they're not different from a service that's being delivered by a provider down the road.
If you haven't got a really great plan in place at this point in time, you're probably really going to struggle after February 2017.
Try and think whether your organisation has been at the forefront of driving that paradigm shift, or whether it's needing to actually, move to the forefront, to actually move as quickly as the pace of reform requires. Information is the starting point. You really have to very seriously school yourself.
At one level, it's very clearly understanding who it is that they're appealing to, understanding what they're good at, because not all aged care providers have to do exactly the same thing.
The prominence of good governance is the starting point, that you have a board, you have an oversight committee that is leading the organisation in its strategic outcomes.
So I think the key is actually going to be empowering consumers.
And we are going to live or die by how well we manage to address those concerns and expectations, and how well we manage to delight our customers into the future. I think that's a really positive thing for the sustainability of this industry. I think it's a really great thing for organisations that really managed to change their business model in order to address those customer concerns. And I think that it's a great thing for customers and our community generally.